Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. On this channel, we take on the issue of narcissism and, more than anything else, help you learn how to navigate these relationships so you can heal, recover, or just make sense of them. If you're interested in doing a deeper dive on healing, probably beyond the scope of this YouTube channel, go to the video notes, click on that link. It'll give you more information about our healing-specific program for people who have experienced narcissistic abuse. But this channel will give you a great introduction to everything else you want to know. And if you are new to this channel, please do subscribe. We post new content every day. And if you want notifications on that, also hit that notification button. So today we're going to talk about a very interesting concept of this idea of psychological passwords and how your passwords can get hacked by the narcissistic people in your life that you already know and that you haven't even met yet. This idea of sort of psychological passwords is a concept that more than a few people have thrown around in emails and other communications with me. And I recognize that when it comes to narcissistic relationships, it is very, very important that people be aware of what their sort of passwords are. Because once our passwords sort of get sort of psychologically entered, we're in a bit of trouble if people hack their ways into our psyches instead of using the right passwords, as it were. I like this idea of passwords. It's a good metaphor because once we understand what our passwords are, why we have them, and why we shouldn't have simple ones that can be easily figured out, it helps us to make sure that we just don't let anyone in. So let's just start with the healthiest version of this. A psychological password, in a way, should be something that someone holds out for before we let someone in too deeply. For example, holding out for kindness, respect, self-reflection, and self-awareness on the other person's behalf, compassion, showing up on time, communicating clearly, showing empathy. If people do these things consistently in a variety of situations, then in essence, they're typing in the right passwords, which may allow you to slowly open up and be vulnerable. In essence, you're sort of slowly letting them into your proverbial psychological hard drive. Now, on previous videos, I've talked about the concept of firewalling, the idea that to protect ourselves from narcissistic people, that we first need to protect the information that goes out of us, in essence, maintain our psychological passwords so that we don't share information that could be used to harm us in a toxic relationship. And secondly, to protect what's coming in by recognizing red flags and having boundaries and taking our time. In both cases, passwords matter. So when I think about psychological passwords, I think about all the ways that people, especially people who aren't necessarily good for us, can get into our sort of psyches too quickly and harm us, maybe because our so-called passwords are too simple. So they may sort of hack to get through our psychological passwords. These places they can breach our passwords are the vulnerabilities that we have that can be bypassed by the other person acting in a way that plays on these vulnerabilities and may lead us to not see the red flags, or malware as the case may be, and perhaps share information with that other person that ultimately may be used to control, manipulate, gaslight, or exploit us. You know how your computer sometimes tells you, hey, one of your passwords may have been breached, fix it. Or that we're seeing that more and more sites require more and more complicated passwords with capital letters and special symbols and numbers and all of that. We kind of need these reminders as people, right? That we need to kind of make our psychological passwords more on point if we want to protect ourselves from toxic relationships. So let's break down how narcissistic people can hack into your hard drive without, and kind of almost bypassing, I guess, the healthy and safe passwords. Number one, they take advantage of you being a rescuer or a fixer. One of the legacies of childhood narcissistic abuse quite often is that a person can feel like they need to be useful or jump through hoops to earn love. So when someone comes along that needs help, well, that just unlocks that password. As you know, I've cited this idea of a person who's a rescuer, that these are folks who are narcissistic targets. But this also acts as a password for a person who wants to be needed. And the narcissistic person will groom a person. They will love bomb them. And then they'll often present themselves as needing something, advice, money, rescuing, caregiving. And that will often suck people into these relationships. Before long, you are giving more and receiving nothing. And meanwhile, they are corrupting your system. Another thing to keep in mind is that some people sort of, even without the narcissistically abusive childhood, they believe love is about rescuing. Oh, if you love someone, then you'll do what they ask you for because that's love, right? You just do things for people. It's kind of a nice thought, but it's a little bit not discerning enough, right? It's not passwordy enough that you want to be able to say, I'll do for this person, but I also want to trust my instincts. Like, this seems like a big ask or an inappropriate ask this early in a relationship. Like, you basically, so much, the way to think about this is narcissistic relationships are so often like a street hustle. They're often trying to figure out a way to play you, and pretty quickly and early in the relationship. So it's not just that people who have histories of narcissistic abuse from childhood can get played by this idea of wanting to be a rescuer. Some people make the mistake that, oh, well, if I'm in love, it means I just do what the other person wants. Not so much. The second way they may hack your passwords is that you're a person who finds yourself wanting the fairy tale, that you like charm, that you want to be deeply desired. Some of this is normal, right? To want to be in something special, to want to feel really desired. But narcissistic partners are better at this than anybody. They are very skilled at seduction in all of its forms. They're very good at the grandiose love bomb, as it were. So wanting that fairy tale or getting lost in that really wanting to be desired can be a real risk for being narcissistically hacked. Ordinary folks often do ordinary things when they're in a new relationship. Movies, local neighborhood bar, just the basic stuff of life. But if someone has a narrative around wanting the fairy tale, even if they aren't fully honest with themselves about it, once it starts happening, it's easy to ignore the red flags. A third sort of hacking issue is when people want excitement. I personally came of age pre-Tinder and pre-dating apps, so I've never used them, but plenty of my clients and friends have shown them to me. And one trend that jumped out at me when I was looking at little people's bios or whatever the hell they're called was how many people were communicating that they were all about excitement, looking for adventure, looking for a travel friend, love extreme sports. It's all very cool and neat, but when that desire to throw caution to the wind in the name of excitement and adventure, that's not only where you may get the risk of not only love bombing, but someone who is so focused on their adventures and their sort of adrenaline highs that they're only sort of fleetingly interested in you. Getting too lost in wanting sort of the adventure of it all without ensuring that the healthy fundamentals are there can definitely set you up for a narcissistic password hack. But someone who pings off of all of that excitement seeking, and you want that, you're at risk of sometimes getting so lost in the adventure and missing the red flags, which can leave you getting deeply hurt. The fourth sort of hacking point is familiarity. This may be the most treacherous of all psychological password hacks. Even when we think we have our stuff, our histories figured out, the familiar always draws us in. Familiarity can be quite toxic, especially for those who came from narcissistic family systems. Whether it's the familiarity of gaslighting or having to win someone over or the push-pull of the trauma bond, this can outwit any boundaries and firewalls you have up unless you really have your head in the game. Taking on a familiar role in a relationship can be quite almost reflexive. Narcissistic people during the love bombing phase are testing the waters. They do seduce and idealize, but they also test limits. And if that limit testing is familiar to what you have experienced in past relationships or in early relationships, you may let that boundary keep getting eroded more and more. People who are on to the narcissist or may not have such a powerful familiarity password may be more willing to call out the gaslighting and other toxic patterns. And if that happens early, the narcissistic person may try hard for a minute to win you over, but then they may get bored and give up because you're not giving in to them. But for those who may open themselves up in the face of the familiarity, and this often happens under the radar, so you're not even aware you're getting sucked in by that sense of familiarity, then what you're doing is you're communicating to the narcissistic person without even knowing it that they can keep pushing those boundaries and you'll keep jumping through the hoops. A fifth kind of hack that the narcissists really capitalize on is this concept of working through. This is similar to familiarity, but with one more step. Someone sort of sticking it out in a narcissistic relationship in the hope of sort of working through earlier stuff. Maybe you couldn't win over your unavailable parent. Well, that can be a real call to arms to want to work this through in an adult relationship, to win a slippery person over, to get it just right this time, to work through whatever the issues were in earlier relationships, or not being seen, not being valued, not being abandoned, whatever it is. Alas, if your early relationships had these challenges, then working them through in an adult relationship is a risk. And unfortunately, a narcissistic relationship is often one where you aren't seen or valued or it's inconsistent. So it may represent something that you want to work through, and the working through won't work, and it starts to sort of feel like Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. You just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So when any of these are framed as sort of narcissistic hacks, really basically a way to get around our psychological passwords, or secondarily, these easy to guess passwords we didn't know we had. What I mean is that these are those parts of us, often based on our histories, that if they get triggered or activated, may mean that we open up probably more quickly than we should. We share things, time, resources that may put us at risk. The narcissistic person is like a hacker going from person to person to find where they are not only going to be able to get validation and supply, but also figuring out where their narcissistic ground game works and playing upon the existing vulnerabilities that so many of us have. Some people wonder, is that all of this conscious on the part of the narcissist? It's hard to say. They're so focused on regulating and getting narcissistic supply that it's not about you. It's about them. A scorpion doesn't interview a victim before it stings. It just stings. Narcissistic abuse is similar. So you may wonder, what's your best protection to this? We all, most of us, have these vulnerabilities. The key is to be aware of them. Allow ourselves to take our time, question the whole too good to be true of it all, and have stakeholders that can be honest with us. Don't let shame stop us from seeking help, and constantly be mindful and check in with ourselves. Listen, I personally don't think any of us are hack-proof, but we can try and be aware of those psychological spaces, those places inside of us where the passwords can be found and used and abused. And we can really add a few more characters to our healthy psychological passwords so they're harder to figure out, and all of us become more discerning before letting people in. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you're doing healing from narcissistic abuse, right, it's taking longer and longer for people to get in, and that's okay. I know I've had this experience recently where I have met some new people, and I'm so careful, and I'm very aware of it in real time. And I thought, you know what, that's okay. That's okay. If these people really are that, sort of interested in getting to know me, they'll put the time in, and if they're not, they'll disappear. And then I may have just sort of saved myself a world of hurt. But it's really thinking about those psychological passwords. My psychological passwords have about 55 characters right now. So they get longer the more of this we go through. But think about that. But more than just your healthy passwords, also be aware of the back doors that these narcissistic hackers are using to get in. Thanks again.